Good evening, members of the council. Chris Kennedy, Okie Traditionalist blog and podcast. I changed the name of the Make Broken Arrow Great Again to Okie Traditionalist. So I want to first address a few things. It seems that Lisa Ford, after a discussion between me and her husband on Facebook, influenced her daughter, it's more likely than not. And her daughter left some very defamatory false statements on my podcast page in the reviews where I can't remove it. So it's there permanently. I've asked her to stop posting and she refused, which 2 times. Therefore, that's two acts of cyber harassment. I asked Lisa Ford to make sure she stops. And unfortunately, because it was not stopped, her daughter is going to be added to the legal recourse that I have. Last meeting, the city manager was praised for reaching 38 years of service in his field. Okay, so he defended himself, saying that regarding the Airbnb ordinance, there wasn't his quote overreach because the chief of police brought the issue to him. Well, that's not even logical. Just because it was brought to him doesn't mean it's not overreach. Creating an ordinance that is not necessary, that puts undue burden on citizens, is not only overreach, but it's super overreach. Is what I had to actually use the word tyrannical. So I really hope you'll take it to heart that there is a statute and a policy for the city of Broken Arrow which establishes the council as the primary authority and therefore over the city manager. Right now we have a de facto administrative dictatorship where the city council has effectively neglected its statutory obligations, effectively transferring it onto this one man. Makes $300,000 a year. Plus a bunch of bonuses, by the way, including an extraordinarily high level of retirement bonus. So this has to be reinverted back to its proper constitutional order, where every city ordinance that establishes the very structure of the city government is a kind of mini local constitution. We need to go back to who we are as Americans, as Oklahomans, and as Broken Arrowans. And not just let government do everything for us and put itself at high risk of corruption. So as far as the Airbnb ordinance, I have 2 proposals, actually 3. We'll start with the first one, that if I am elected to city council in a year, that we will undo that ordinance. We'll rescind it, take it back. Number 2 is that we enforce the law, that we don't need to create a new law. There's already laws against public nuisances. Not a problem. We use the best of our resources in the police department, whereby the city council instructs the city manager that what it would like to see be done. And then the city manager executes that proposal as executive to direct the city chief of police and leadership under him to create a new plan, a new protocol for the city to address this problem, and then do it. And then execute the law. The second is that we do everything we can to get more and more away from this idea that government is always the best solution. And if government is always the best solution, then it needs to prove that. Like, it needs to come out with scientific studies, like hardcore evidence that it needs to be involved to regulate a certain part of society, including the economy. And if it can't do that, the burden is on it, then it's not credible. It needs to first do that in every situation. Otherwise, the status quo, or otherwise the rule of Of course, there are exceptions, but to any rule. But as a rule, history has shown that the less a government rules over people, the better. The less government regulates and intervenes and controls and the economy and businesses in certain industries, the better. Because who's the best to oversee a certain business or industry or any part of society? The people who are doing it, the people who are the experts, not bureaucrats at City Hall. And that's not a pejorative, that's just a fact, okay? We have a bureaucracy. If we create, a new thing where you have to go spend, $500,000 a year for a license just to let people use your house in exchange for some money, that goes way beyond overreach. You're dealing with potentially hundreds of people, and unjustly, unfairly, the city taking advantage of that to get hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Again, to have more taxes so that we can have more tax and spend. The answer is not more tax and spend. It isn't more taxes. It's less taxes. It's less government to enable society to be able to regulate itself. It's to uphold the legal rights of people, uphold the law, to provide public safety, roads, and really, public safety, roads. Those are the main things. And then to uphold the common good, the moral, spiritual good of society is best upheld by the government by stepping out of the way, by enabling free market capitalism, where there's little or no regulations. Of course, there has to be some regulations. If you step inside of Walmart, there has to be some regulations to regulate the safety of the food and the products and the environment. And there are state and federal laws that already do that. But we should really be going back to this model of business associations. Okay, and this goes back to at least the Middle Ages. This was the Christian era, whether that would be Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, in which the faith institutions essentially not dictated but gave guidance to the formation or the oversight of business associations, professional associations, which were called guilds. So there was a guild for doctors, for lawyers, for carpenters, contractors, etc. And you could join the guild or not. But that was the central authority to help regulate that part of the economy. And it committed itself to a sacred oath, to certain moral standards that at the time were based upon the Holy Scriptures, upon the Word of God, upon the church and faith institutions, helping to interpret and guide the application of the Word of God to the buying and selling of goods and services, to what makes for a fair market, where things are not excessively charged for something, right? Where you do not create big monopolies, where you cannot have banks who use usury to essentially take over society by almost owning everything based upon an excessive amount of interest and profit. Like there should be always a moderate amount of profit, that's not excessive. And so, as far as Airbnb or anything in Broken Arrow like that, take the industry, encourage people in the industry to form a Facebook group, establish an organization where they meet every so often, and they just give some general oversight to the industry. So if you own an Airbnb in Broken Arrow, and you want to be taken seriously, you go join that association. You get their certification, you get their approval. They come out and inspect maybe once a year, not for $1,000 or $500, maybe for $50, like a donation. And then You get their stamp of approval. You put it on your website, advertising the Airbnb, or even at the property, and you have the option to join that or not. Maybe you can make it on your own, or maybe you want to take advantage of this. Airbnb, but I propose considering it, and that we need to shift back to this traditional model, right, where we honor the liberty of society. We avoid as much as possible excessive government, oppression, things that lead to socialism, communism, totalitarianism. I changed the name, Make Broken Arrow Great Again podcast to the Okie Traditionalist podcast. And part of the name is there's a hyphen after traditionalist with Chris Kennedy running for Broken Arrow City Council. So that's all part of the name for now. Is because Donald Trump, who I've supported, I'd argue I've probably been his number one supporter, despite all his flaws and certain policies I disagree with, despite all his narcissistic tendencies and tendencies towards greed. I supported him right when he came down the escalator that day in 2015, up until about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. My support started sliding backward like a lot of Trumpers, because he was bombed Iran, last summer. And then he essentially started a war without congressional approval. It's a real war between us and Iran. It's us and Israel versus Iran, but it's also us versus Iran. We are at war with Iran. They are at war with us. But when he's posted those mandates, not just personality social media comments, these were his official policies that he mandated to the people, the government of Iran, that they either free up the Strait of Hormuz, or he is going to instruct his military to completely wipe out the power grid by bombing all power plants. It's about bombing all the bridges and the salination plants that desalination. They desalinate, take out the saline, the salt from the salt water, so that people have water to drink. So when he made these threats, they were not just threats. They were not just him bluffing and the art of the deal. They were in themselves war crimes, because he was putting the fear of hell into 90 million people, that he was going to do it by midnight, or else they'd be put in a situation where they'd have no electricity, many places no water. Very fastly, many people would die. Especially, you start in the hospitals, people like little babies, the little neonatal infants who are on incubators. Within hours, many thousands of people would have died. Within days, weeks, we're talking on the order of tens of thousands. On the order, as I did an AI analysis, according to AI, which has some use, its estimate was 100,000 dead within 6 weeks, and then hundreds of thousands of dead, I would surmise, in the months ahead. It taking years to bring it back to like a modern civilization, and to bring the death of innocent civilians to an end. So I'm saying all this because I suspect that despite certain issues I've had with certain people in the city council, that a lot of you, deep down, if we were in private talking, you'd say, yeah, I'm a MAGA Trumper. I support Trump. I support MAGA. I'm a Republican. I vote Republican. I vote on who Trump supports. And you would probably agree with me that what he did was a war crime. It was a terrible act from which that really should, with any other person, should result in impeachment and possible imprisonment. So I ask you to appeal to your own Christian conscience and to that commandment of the Holy Scriptures that says, thou shalt not kill. He didn't kill people, but he threatened to kill people. There was a man who once put a gun to my aunt's head. She was working in a department store, and he came in to rob it. He put a gun to her head. She thought she was going to die. 30 years later, she's still having like PTSD episodes because of that. Imagine that's happening to 90 million people because of Donald Trump. With war crime. So I encourage all of you to also disavow. I'm encouraging everyone who might be MAGA and Trumper like I was, disavow him. Call immediately as fast as possible for his removal before he actually does it, before his abstract threats become real in the concrete, before there's massive murder, like intentional acts that result intentionally in the killing of civilians. And we are the fourth largest city in Oklahoma, right? If we are named the best city in Oklahoma, 12th best city in the United States, we can't just rely on the federal government and state government. All city governments, major cities, should make statements, should do something. So my last proposal would be this: why not consider drafting a resolution where you condemn his overt threats of war crime to bomb the entire country, wipe out its civilization, intentionally resulting in the death of civilians. And so if I was on the city council, that would be something I would consider and discuss with others. All right. Thank you for listening. God bless.